Picture this. You're standing in the meat aisle of a grocery store and you feel it. That pull toward the steak, the bacon, the burger patty sitting there under plastic wrap like it's got a personality. You didn't choose that craving. Nobody sat you down as a toddler and said, hey, prioritize animal flesh. That pull is older than language, older than fire, older than the wheel. It's older than every civilization that's ever existed. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why your brain still treats a slab of cooked meat like it just won the lottery. Because here's the thing nobody tells you in school. Humans didn't become humans in spite of eating meat. We became humans because of it. Strip away the myths, the diet culture noise, the Instagram wellness gurus yelling at you about seed oils, and what you're left with is a 2 million-year-old survival story written directly into your DNA, your teeth, your gut, and yes, even your taste buds. So let's rewind the clock, way back, not grandma's grandma back. We're talking somewhere around 2.6 million years ago in the dusty savannas of East Africa, where a bunch of small-brained, awkward-looking hominins were trying to figure out how to survive in an environment that wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. At this point, our ancestors were mostly plant eaters. Fruits, leaves, roots, the occasional insect if they were desperate. Think of it like a permanent salad bar, except the salad bar is trying to kill you with drought. And half the salad gives you almost no calories for the amount of chewing required. This is a rough way to live. Chewing tough plant fiber for 6, 7, 8 hours a day just to get enough energy to survive. Not exactly a party. Then something changes. Archaeologists dig into the ground in a place called Gona in modern-day Ethiopia. And what do they find? Animal bones, covered in cut marks. Not teeth marks, cut marks. The kind you get from a sharp-edged rock deliberately dragged across bone to strip away meat. This is one of the oldest known signs of hominins using tools to butcher animals, dated to roughly 2.6 million years ago. Now stop and think about what that actually means. Some hominin, without language, without a plan drawn on a napkin, figured out that smashing one rock against another could create a sharp edge. And that sharp edge could open up an entire food source that was previously locked behind a hide and muscle. This wasn't a recipe. This was a technological revolution. And it may be the single most important invention in the history of our species. More important than the wheel, more important than writing, because without it, there might not have been anyone around later to invent the wheel or writing at all. Here's why that mattered so much. Meat is calorie-dense and nutrient-dense in a way that almost nothing else in that environment was. A single kilogram of animal fat contains roughly 9,000 calories. Compare that to trying to get the same energy from tubers or leaves, which might require you to eat several kilograms of plant matter, chew it for hours, and still come up short on protein and fat. Meat, and especially fat, was the ancient equivalent of finding an energy shortcut in a video game, except the cheat code was real and it was edible, and your body still remembers this. That's not a metaphor. Your brain has specific reward circuits, dopamine pathways, that light up more intensely in response to energy-dense, fat and protein-rich foods than they do in response to, say, celery. This isn't a moral failing. This isn't you being weak-willed at a barbecue. This is roughly 2 million years of natural selection whispering directly into your nervous system. Energy-dense food equals survival. There's prioritize it. Okay, but here's where it gets even more interesting. Because eating meat didn't just help our ancestors survive a rough patch, it appears to have physically reshaped their bodies and brains. Let's talk about brains for a second, because this is the part that tends to blow people's mind. The human brain is metabolically expensive, absurdly expensive. It makes up about 2% of your total body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of your resting energy use. 20%. For comparison, most mammals spend somewhere around 3 to 5% of their resting energy on brain function. Our brains are basically luxury sports cars parked inside. Economy car bodies, guzzling fuel nonstop 24 hours a day, even while you sleep, even while you're doing absolutely nothing except scrolling on your phone at 2 in the morning. So the obvious question is, how did a skinny, slow, clawless, fangless primate afford to run something this expensive? You can't build a Ferrari engine on a diet of low-calorie leaves. Something had to give the ancestors of Homo the fuel and the raw materials to grow that expensive brain tissue. This is where a hypothesis called the expensive tissue hypothesis comes in, developed by researchers Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler in the 1990s. Their argument was elegant. Big brains need a lot of energy. Big digestive systems, like the giant plant-fermenting guts of gorillas, also need a lot of energy. You can't easily afford both at the same time on a limited energy budget. So what likely happened in our lineage is that as the diet shifted toward more energy-dense, easier to digest foods, meat being the star player, our gut could shrink. And the energy that used to be spent maintaining a massive fermentation chamber of an intestine could get redirected somewhere else, somewhere upstairs. Look at the numbers. Human intestines are notably smaller relative to body size than you'd expect for a primate our size, especially compared to our great ape cousins, who have these huge, wide, cathedral-sized colons built for grinding through mountains of fibrous plant material all day. We downsized the digestive real estate. And around the same evolutionary window, brain size in the hominin lineage started climbing dramatically, especially after the appearance of Homo erectus roughly 1.9 million years ago, a species with a noticeably larger brain than its predecessors and notably strong archaeological evidence of regular meat consumption and tool-assisted butchery. Now, to be fair, scientists still debate exactly how much of a role meat played versus other factors like cooking, social cooperation, and changing climates. This isn't a closed case with a neat little bow on it, but the fossil and archaeological evidence lines up in a pretty compelling way. More reliable access to dense animal fats and proteins around the same time as gut shrinkage and brain expansion. That's not proof of a straight causal line, but it's a seriously strong correlation, and it's one most anthropologists take very seriously. Now let's talk about cooking, because raw meat alone doesn't fully explain the story either. There's a researcher named Richard Wrangham who has spent a huge chunk of his career arguing that fire changed everything. His idea, sometimes called the cooking hypothesis, suggests that once our ancestors started reliably cooking food, digestion became dramatically easier and more efficient. Cooked meat and cooked starches require far less energy to break down than raw versions of the same food. Your gut doesn't have to work nearly as hard, which means more net calories actually make it into your bloodstream instead of getting lost in digestion or spent on the digestive process itself. Think about it this way. Raw meat is tough, it's chewy, your jaw has to work overtime, your stomach acid has to work overtime, and a good chunk of the potential energy in that meat just doesn't get extracted efficiently. Cooking breaks down connective tissue, denatures proteins, and essentially pre-digests part of the meal before it even reaches your mouth. Fire became an outsourced stomach, a free upgrade to human digestion that cost nothing but time and a bit of wood. And once that upgrade existed, evolution capitalized on it immediately. Smaller teeth, smaller jaw muscles, a shorter gut, and all that spared energy redirected once again into brain tissue. This is why, if you look at a chimpanzee skull next to a modern human skull, one of the most obvious differences is the size of the jaw and the teeth. Chimps need massive jaw muscles and huge molars because they're processing raw, fibrous, tough food constantly. Humans don't need that hardware anymore because cooking, and to a lesser extent tool-based butchery, did a huge chunk of the mechanical work for us before food ever touched our teeth. So by this point, a picture starts forming. Meat provided a dense energy source. Tools let us access that energy source efficiently. Fire let us extract even more value from it. And all of that surplus energy got funneled into growing the most expensive organ in the animal kingdom, your brain. But here's a twist that a lot of people miss. This wasn't a one-way relationship where meat made us smart and that was that. It was a feedback loop. A bigger brain allowed for better planning, better tool making, better social coordination, all of which made hunting and scavenging more successful, which provided more meat, which supported an even bigger brain. Around and around it went for well over 1 million years. It's one of the most beautiful feedback loops in the history of evolutionary biology, and honestly, it's kind of wild that it happened at all. Now let's talk about the hunting versus scavenging debate, because this is where things get a little messier and honestly a little more human. For a long time, the popular image of early meat-eating hominins was this dramatic spear-throwing hunter bringing down massive prey. Very cinematic, very man the hunter. But the archaeological evidence for the earliest meat-eating phases actually points more towards scavenging. Our ancestors were likely picking off scraps that predators like lions and hyenas left behind, or arriving early enough after a kill to strip meat and, crucially, to smash open bones for the marrow and brain tissue inside, which are absurdly calorie-rich. There's actually a clever detail hidden in the cut marks on some of these ancient bones. Researchers can tell, based on the pattern and location of the marks, whether hominins got there before or after the big carnivores had already stripped the easy meat. In many early cases, the marks suggest our ancestors were working around teeth marks already left by other predators, meaning they were arriving at carcasses after the main feast was already over, scavenging the leftovers, cracking bones for marrow that other predators couldn't access as efficiently. This detail matters because it tells a story about ingenuity rather than brute strength. Our ancestors weren't out-muscling lions. They were out-thinking the entire ecosystem, using tools to access nutrition that other animals physically could not reach. That's the origin story of human meat eating. Not dominance through force, but survival through cleverness, patience, and a willingness to do the extremely unglamorous work of cracking open old bones on a hot savanna for the marrow inside. Eventually, as tool technology improved and social cooperation got more sophisticated, actual hunting of live prey became more common and more effective. Coordinated group hunting shows up increasingly in the archaeological and behavioral record as hominin brains and social structures developed further. But that early scavenging phase, unglamorous as it is, might be one of the most underrated chapters in our evolutionary story. Now let's fast forward and talk about your body, because if this whole meat-eating chapter really did shape us this deeply, there should be physical evidence still sitting inside you right now. And there is. Start with stomach acid. Human stomach acid is remarkably strong, with a pH that can drop as low as 1 to 2 under digestion, putting us in a similar range to scavenging carnivores like vultures, rather than typical herbivores. Highly acidic stomach environments are useful for two big reasons: breaking down tough proteins and killing off dangerous bacteria that tend to be present in decaying or raw meat. That second point is especially relevant if your ancestors were, as we just discussed, occasionally eating meat that had been sitting out in the African sun for a while before they got to it. Then there's your teeth. You've still got canines, sure, but nowhere near the size of a true carnivore's. What you do have is a mixed dental toolkit: incisors for cutting, canines for gripping and tearing, molars for grinding. This is the dental signature of what scientists actually classify humans as: not strict carnivores and not strict herbivores, but omnivores, built with a flexible toolkit for a flexible diet. Then there's an underrated one: your eyes. Around 2 to 3 million years ago, hominins evolved enhanced color vision that's particularly good at detecting reds and certain earthy tones against green backgrounds. There's a hypothesis, still debated but genuinely interesting, that this vision upgrade helped with spotting ripe fruit, but it may have also helped with something else entirely: spotting blood and detecting fresh carcasses or predator kill sites from a distance. Some researchers have specifically connected trichromatic vision to advantages in identifying edible resources, and meat-related cues would plausibly be part of that. And then there's the genetics. This is one of my favorite pieces of evidence because it's so direct. There's a gene involved in producing an enzyme that breaks down fats, and research has shown that certain populations carry gene variants strongly associated with a long history of higher meat and fat consumption, showing measurable differences in how efficiently they process saturated fat compared to populations with different dietary histories. In other words, depending on your ancestry, your body may literally be running slightly different fat processing software based on what your ancestors were eating for the last several thousand years. Evolution doesn't stop being relevant just because you're standing in a grocery store instead of a savanna. It's still running in the background of your biology right now. Okay, so let's bring this back to you, right now, today. Why does a sizzling steak still hit different than a bowl of steamed kale, even for people who genuinely, sincerely love vegetables? Part of it comes down to something called the sensory-specific reward response. Fat and protein trigger stronger dopamine responses in the brain's reward circuitry than plain carbohydrates or fiber alone. And that combination, fat plus protein plus that specific savory flavor profile scientists call umami, hits multiple reward pathways at once. Umami receptors on your tongue detect glutamate, an amino acid that's abundant in meat. And when the signal reaches your brain alongside the fat content and the smell compounds released by cooking, you get this multi-sensory jackpot that's very hard for a plant-based whole food to replicate on its own, at least not without some serious culinary engineering. This is also, by the way, why so much of modern comfort food is engineered to mimic that exact profile. Cheese, fried food, fast food burgers. Food scientists have basically reverse engineered the ancient meat and fat reward signal and cranked the dial up to 11 using industrial ingredients. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when a burger sounds better than a salad at 11 at night. It's running exactly the software it was built to run, in an environment absolutely nothing like the one that software was designed for. The savannah never had a 24-hour drive-through. Your dopamine system doesn't know that. There's also a psychological layer worth mentioning. Meat has held cultural weight across basically every human society we have record of. Shared meals involving meat show up repeatedly across history, in feasts, celebrations, rites of passage, and community bonding rituals. There's a reasonable evolutionary argument that group hunting and sharing of meat also helped build social cooperation, trust networks, and group cohesion among early humans, since large game typically produces more meat than one person or family can consume alone, creating strong incentives for sharing, reciprocity, and social bonds. So, on some level, when you associate meat with celebration, gathering, and connection, whether it's a holiday roast or a backyard barbecue, you're tapping into something that may go back hundreds of thousands of years. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Now, I want to be careful here because this video is not trying to tell you what to eat. That's not the point, and honestly, it's not really my place to tell you that. Humans are remarkably adaptable omnivores, and thriving human populations have existed on a huge range of diets, from meat-heavy Arctic communities to largely plant-based agricultural society. The evolutionary story explains why the craving exists and where the biological hardware came from. It doesn't hand you a mandatory instruction manual for the 21st century. Context matters, availability matters, culture matters, personal health matters. Evolution built the starting setting. It didn't lock in the only acceptable choice forever, but understanding the why behind the craving is genuinely useful. It takes something that can feel like a personal weakness, like a lack of discipline, and reframes it as what it actually is: an ancient, deeply logical survival mechanism operating in a modern world that looks nothing like the one it was built. You're not broken for craving a burger. You're running a 2 million-year-old operating system in a world full of hyper-processed food that specifically exploits it. So let's zoom back out one more time and look at the full arc of this story. Somewhere around 2.5 to 3 million years ago, a small, unimpressive primate in East Africa was struggling to survive on tough, low-calorie plant food. Then, through a combination of environmental pressure, sheer curiosity, and what might be the greatest accidental discovery in evolutionary history, that primate figured out how to smash rocks into sharp tools. Those tools opened up access to animal fat and protein, first through scavenging, later through active hunting. That new energy source allowed the digestive system to shrink and freed up energy for something else to grow: the brain. Later, the mastery of fire supercharged this entire process, making food easier to digest and further reducing the energetic cost of extracting nutrition, funneling even more surplus energy into cognitive development. Bigger brains led to better tools, better cooperation, better hunting strategies, and better survival. And the cycle repeated, generation after generation, for well over 1 million years, gradually building the species capable of reading this sentence right now, sitting somewhere on a couch or a train or a kitchen counter, holding a phone, thinking about dinner. And through all of that, your body kept receipts: your stomach acid, your dental structure, your vision, your fat metabolism genes, your dopamine response to sizzling fat, and umami flavor. None of that is an accident, and none of it is random. It's a physical record of one of the most important dietary shifts in the entire history of life on this planet, still running quietly in the background every single time you get hungry. So next time you catch that craving, that undeniable pull towards something rich, savory, fatty, cooked to perfection, don't think of it as some modern indulgence, some guilty pleasure invented by fast food chains. Think of it as an echo, a signal traveling across roughly 2.5 million years, from a small band of clever, hungry hominins cracking open bones on a hot savanna, all the way to you, standing in your kitchen, phone in one hand, fork in the other. They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have seasoning. They definitely didn't have delivery apps. What they had was ingenuity, sharp rocks, fire, and an absolutely relentless drive to get enough calories to keep that expensive, brilliant, endlessly hungry brain of yours running. And somehow, against some pretty brutal odds, it worked. You're the result. Every single one of us is walking, talking proof that the strategy paid off.